A single father opens a drawer in an abandoned trailer and finds letters that reveal his children aren't actually his. What Michael discovered in those yellowed envelopes destroyed everything he believed about his family, but what happened next, nobody saw coming. Stay until the end, because this story takes a turn that will leave you speechless. Michael Peterson stood in front of the rusted trailer on the outskirts of Bakersfield, California, holding the hands of his two children, 7-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Danny. The year was 1990, and life had hit him harder than he ever imagined possible. His wife Jennifer had died 6 months earlier in a car accident, leaving him alone with 2 kids, a mountain of hospital bills, and an eviction notice that gave him 72 hours to find somewhere to live. This abandoned trailer wasn't a choice, it was survival. The owner of the small grocery store where Michael worked had mentioned it during a shift, saying nobody had lived there for almost 3 years, and that if Michael could get it running, he could stay rent-free for 6 months while getting back on his feet. Michael had no other options. The trailer smelled like mold and forgotten dreams when they first walked in. Emma wrinkled her nose and Danny started crying, asking if this was really where they had to live now. Michael knelt down, pulled both kids close, and promised them it was temporary, just until he saved enough money for a real apartment. He spent the first night scrubbing floors, while the children slept on sleeping bags he'd borrowed from a co-worker. The next morning he started going through the cabinets and drawers, throwing away trash left behind by whoever lived there before. That's when he found the shoebox. It was tucked in the back of a kitchen drawer, underneath old takeout menus and expired coupons. The box was light, filled with letters tied together with a faded red ribbon. Michael almost threw it away, but something made him untie that ribbon and pull out the first envelope. The handwriting was elegant, carefully written in blue ink that had faded over time. The letter was addressed to someone named Robert, and as Michael began reading, his hands started shaking. The letter was from a woman named Catherine, dated April 1983, and it started with the words, "I need to tell you the truth about the children." Michael's heart pounded as he kept reading. Catherine wrote that she had been having an affair with a man named Thomas while married to Robert, and that both of their children, a daughter and a son, were not Robert's biological children. She explained that she couldn't live with the guilt anymore, and that she was leaving, taking the children with her, because she couldn't face Robert after everything she'd done. The letter ended with an apology and a confession that she had already packed and would be gone by the time Robert came home from work. Michael sat down at the small kitchen table, the letter trembling in his hands. He looked toward the bedroom where Emma and Danny were still sleeping, and a cold fear crept into his chest. He pulled out another letter, this one dated a week later. It was also from Catherine, but the tone was different, desperate. She wrote that she had made a terrible mistake leaving, that Thomas had abandoned her and the children, and that she needed Robert to forgive her. She begged him to let her come back, saying the children needed their father, even if he wasn't their biological father. She wrote that family wasn't about blood, it was about love and sacrifice. Michael's mind raced. He wondered what had happened to Robert, to Catherine, to those children. He wondered why these letters were still here, hidden in a drawer never answered. He started going through the rest of the box, finding more letters, each one more heartbreaking than the last. Catherine wrote about struggling to feed the kids, about sleeping in her car, about regretting every decision she'd made. In the final letter, dated 6 months after she left, she wrote that she was giving up, that she couldn't provide for the children, and that she was going to leave them at her sister's house in Oregon, because at least there they would have food and a roof over their heads. Michael felt sick. He thought about his own wife Jennifer, about how she had loved Emma and Danny with everything she had. He thought about the accident that took her away, about how unfair life could be, about how some people abandoned their families while others would do anything to keep them together. He carefully put the letters back in the box and placed it on the top shelf of the closet. He didn't know what to do with them, but he couldn't throw them away. Those letters represented real people, real pain, real lives that had fallen apart in this exact trailer. Over the next few weeks, Michael focused on making the trailer livable. He fixed the leaking sink, patched holes in the walls, and cleaned every corner until it actually felt like a home. Emma started smiling again, helping him arrange the few pieces of furniture they had. Danny stopped crying every night and started playing with the toy cars Michael had found at a thrift store. Life was hard, but they were managing. Michael worked double shifts at the grocery store, came home exhausted, made dinner for the kids, helped Emma with her homework, and collapsed into bed every night, wondering how he was going to make it through another day. One evening, about a month after moving in, Michael was putting away dishes when he noticed something strange. Behind the cabinet where he'd found the shoebox, there was a loose panel in the wall. He pulled at it carefully and found another envelope, this one sealed and addressed to Catherine. The postmark was from 1984, a year after she had left. Michael's hands shook as he opened it. The letter was from Robert. Robert wrote that he had received all of Catherine's letters, but hadn't responded because he didn't know what to say. He wrote that finding out the children weren't his had destroyed him, that he had spent months drinking himself to sleep, that he had almost ended his own life. But then he wrote something that made Michael's eyes fill with tears. Robert said that despite everything, despite the betrayal and the lies, he still loved those children. He wrote that he had raised them, changed their diapers, taught them to walk, stayed up with them when they were sick, and that DNA didn't erase any of that. He said he wanted Catherine and the children to come home, that he forgave her, that they could rebuild their family if she was willing to try. The letter ended with Robert writing that he would wait for her, that he was cleaning up the trailer and getting sober, and that whenever she was ready, the door would be open. Michael sat there in the dim light of the kitchen, holding a letter from a man he'd never met, crying for a family that had been broken by secrets and lies. He wondered if Catherine had ever received this letter, if she'd ever come back, if Robert had waited in this trailer for a family that never returned. The next day at work, Michael couldn't stop thinking about those letters. During his lunch break, he asked his boss about the trailer, about who had lived there before. His boss, a man named Frank, who had owned the grocery store for 30 years, rubbed his chin and thought for a moment. He said a man named Robert had lived there back in the 80s, a quiet guy who kept to himself. Frank remembered that Robert had worked construction and had seemed happy until his wife left him. After that, Robert had started drinking heavily, missed work constantly, and eventually disappeared. Frank said he'd heard rumors that Robert had moved to Nevada to work on a ranch, but nobody knew for sure. The trailer had been empty ever since. Michael went home that night with a knot in his stomach. He looked at Emma and Danny playing in the small living room, their laughter filling the space that had once been filled with so much pain. He thought about Robert, about Catherine, about those children who were now adults somewhere, maybe not even knowing the full story of what had happened to their family. He thought about his own wife, Jennifer, about how she had kept a secret from him too, something she'd confessed on her deathbed that had shaken him to his core. Jennifer had told him, with her last breaths in that hospital room, that Emma wasn't his biological daughter. She said she had gotten pregnant during a brief separation they'd had 8 years earlier, when Michael had moved out for 3 months after a huge fight. She said she had considered telling him the truth, but couldn't bear to lose him, so she had let him believe Emma was his. She made him promise, as she lay dying, that he would never treat Emma differently, that he would love her the same way he always had, because she was his daughter in every way that mattered. Michael had kept that promise. After Jennifer died, he never looked at Emma any differently. She was his little girl, his firstborn, the child who called him Daddy and hugged him when he was sad. Blood didn't define fatherhood. Love did, sacrifice did, showing up every single day did. And now, standing in this trailer, surrounded by the ghosts of another broken family, Michael understood Robert in a way he never expected to. He pulled the box of letters down from the closet that night after the kids went to bed. He read through all of them again, this time with a different perspective. He saw himself in Robert's words, saw his own pain and forgiveness reflected in those faded pages. He wondered if Robert had ever found peace, if Catherine had ever read that final letter, if those children had grown up knowing the truth or living in blissful ignorance. Michael decided to do something that might seem crazy to most people. He started writing his own letter. He wrote to whoever might find it, to future residents of this trailer, to anyone who might stumble upon the box of letters like he had. He wrote about Jennifer's confession, about raising Emma knowing she wasn't biologically his, about loving her anyway because that's what real fathers do. He wrote about finding Robert's letters and feeling less alone in his pain. He wrote about forgiveness, about second chances, about how family is built on more than genetics. He sealed his letter and placed it in the box with all the others. Then he put the box back in the drawer where he'd found it, hoping that maybe someday someone else would find it and understand that they weren't alone in their struggles. He hoped that maybe Catherine had eventually seen Robert's letter and that they had found their way back to each other. He hoped that those children, wherever they were, had been loved and cared for. 3 months later, Michael had saved enough money to move into a small apartment across town. On their last day in the trailer, Emma asked him why he seemed sad to leave such an ugly place. Michael knelt down, looked into her eyes, and told her that sometimes the ugliest places teach us the most beautiful lessons. He said the trailer had reminded him what really mattered in life, that it had shown him he wasn't alone in his struggles, and that it had taught him forgiveness in ways he never expected. As they drove away, Michael looked in the rear-view mirror at the trailer getting smaller behind them. He said a silent prayer for Robert, wherever he was, thanking him for the letters and the lessons they contained. He prayed that Robert had found happiness, that Catherine had found peace, and that their children had grown up loved. Years passed. Emma and Danny grew up in that small apartment, never knowing the full story of what their father had discovered in that abandoned trailer. Michael kept Jennifer's secret, loving Emma exactly the same as Danny, never treating her differently, never letting the truth change how he saw her. She was his daughter. Period. On Emma's 18th birthday, Michael thought about telling her the truth, but he decided against it. Some secrets, he realized, were meant to protect the people we love, not burden them. Then, one afternoon in 2003, 13 years after leaving the trailer, Michael received a phone call that changed everything. A woman's voice on the other end asked if he was the Michael Peterson who had lived in a trailer in Bakersfield back in 1990. Michael's heart started racing. He said yes, asking who was calling. The woman introduced herself as Sarah, and she said she was Robert's daughter, one of the children mentioned in those letters. Sarah explained that her father Robert had passed away 2 months earlier in a nursing home in Reno, Nevada. While going through his belongings, she had found Michael's letter, the one he had added to the box all those years ago. She said the trailer had been sold and demolished in 1998, but the new owners had found the box during the demolition and had tracked down Robert, sending him the letters. Robert had kept them until his death, and now Sarah had them. Michael listened, tears streaming down his face, as Sarah told him the rest of the story. Catherine had never received Robert's letter because she had died in 1985, just a year after Robert wrote it. She had been killed in a car accident in Portland, Oregon, the same kind of accident that would later take Jennifer's life. Sarah and her brother had been raised by Catherine's sister, growing up never knowing that Robert wasn't their biological father. They had learned the truth only after finding the letters among Robert's things. Sarah said that reading Michael's letter had helped her understand her father's pain, his forgiveness, his love. She said it had helped her process the revelation that Robert wasn't her biological father, because Michael's words had reminded her that fatherhood isn't about DNA, it's about dedication. She thanked him for adding his story to the box, for creating a bridge between their families, separated by time and circumstance. Michael asked about Robert's final years. Sarah said he had gotten sober in 1986, had worked on a ranch in Nevada for 20 years, and had lived a quiet, simple life. He had never remarried, never had other children, but he had spoken often about Sarah and her brother, always referring to them as his kids, never adding the word biological or step. He had carried the pain of losing them until his death, but he had also carried the love. And in the end, Sarah believed the love had been stronger. Before hanging up, Sarah asked Michael about Emma, about whether he had told her the truth. Michael said no, that he had decided some truths were meant to stay buried. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then said she understood, that maybe that was the right choice, that maybe protecting the people we love sometimes meant keeping secrets that would only hurt them. They talked for 2 more hours that day, 2 strangers connected by tragedy and hidden letters, finding comfort in knowing they weren't alone. Michael never told Emma about that phone call, just like he never told her about Jennifer's deathbed confession. But he kept in touch with Sarah, exchanging letters and occasional phone calls, building an unexpected friendship based on shared understanding. Emma graduated college, got married, had children of her own, never knowing the truth about her biological father. Danny became an engineer, moved to Seattle, lived a good life. Michael watched them both grow into incredible adults, and every time someone mentioned how much Emma looked like Jennifer, he smiled and nodded, keeping the secret locked away. Now, as an old man himself, Michael sometimes thinks about that abandoned trailer, about the letters hidden in the drawer, about Robert and Catherine, and the family that fell apart. He thinks about the strange way life connects people across time and distance, how pain can be shared even between strangers, how love transcends biology. He wonders if he made the right choice, keeping the secret, if Emma deserved to know the truth. But then he remembers Robert's words in that final letter, about how being a father is about showing up, not about chromosomes. The trailer is gone now, demolished decades ago, but the lessons it taught remain. Michael learned that every home, no matter how broken or abandoned, holds stories of people who loved and lost and tried their best. He learned that secrets can destroy families, but they can also protect them. He learned that forgiveness is possible even in the darkest circumstances, and that sometimes the most important thing we can do is choose to love someone, even when we have every reason not to. Tell me in the comments, would you have told Emma the truth or kept the secret like Michael did? What would you have done if you found those letters in an abandoned trailer? Your answer might help someone else facing a similar situation, so don't hold back.